All right, thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Sarah Shoup, and I'm the CEO and founder of UniversityParent. And our mission is to make it easy for parents to find everything they need to support their student from high school all the way to college graduation. And I'm joined here today with my fabulous content team. This is Evan, and this is Diane, and they're responsible for putting together really everything we produce, from email newsletters to our book to our hundreds of guides for colleges around the country. And we've asked our parent audience to submit questions for our friends at Admissionado. And we're so excited that they've joined us here today because so many parents are always asking questions about very specific things about admissions. And we're thrilled to be joined by them so that they can actually answer these questions. So John, I'll let you give a quick intro about Admissionado, and then we'll get started sharing some of the questions that we've had from parents.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for having us here. It's really a pleasure. Happy to answer some questions, of course. Let give you just a little bit of background. So my name is John Frank. I'm the CEO of Admissionado. I went to Brown University for undergrad, Harvard for business school, but don't hold that against me. Actually, I used to work in the real estate business for about 10 years, working in executive development stuff, but I hated it. So in 2007, I founded Admissionado. We actually started by doing graduate school applications, business school applications in our first year, had maybe 12 clients or so, and this past year we probably had close to 500 students, now mostly undergraduate. So when I first read that college guidance counselors are oftentimes faced with 200, 300, on average, over 400 students at a time, my eyes like popped out of their sockets. Our approach couldn't be more different. We realized that sometimes there just aren't enough people to support the need in school. What we do is we set up personalized one-on-one intensive mentorship with our students. And on average, all of our mentors who work with students have been with us for 5 or 7 years, highly trained, and that's how we get to our success rate of roughly 96% a year. So again, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and we can't wait to answer some questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. So our first question from a parent is, my son is having a hard time narrowing his list. How many schools should he apply to, and what should the range look like? For example, what types of institutions and how selective should they be?
Sure, I'll take that one. It's a question we get all the time, and it's a great question. I'm going to try to give very concrete answers, keep things nice and simple. The answer on average is you want to apply to 10 to 12 schools. Okay, less than that is probably not enough. More than that might drive you crazy, and we want to avoid that. The way to look at it is reach schools, target schools, and safety schools. Okay, maybe 4, 4, and 4. Maybe 3, 4, and 3 in terms of reach, target, and safety. A lot of the time we'll be talking to a kid or talking to a parent. A kid might say, "Oh, I don't want to apply to I don't want to go to a safety school. I don't want to go there." What we always say is, we're not saying you have to go, but you should apply. Our job is to give you options. Okay, safety schools are very important. Maybe you decide not to apply or not to go once you get in, but it's important that you apply. It's important that you have options at the end of the process. Okay, so let's get into it. How do you come up with a school list? There are 2 steps to this process. Okay, the first step is, the first deciding factor is going to be easy, GPA and test scores. All right, how do you determine what's a reach school or a target school or a safety school? It's going to be test scores, GPA. This is the easiest way. It's your quickest, most effective yardstick to figure out sort of where in the range does the applicant fall. In terms of step 2, after that piece, it's about researching and finding actually what the student likes about schools. You might look into academic programs, location, university versus liberal arts schools. Not a dramatic difference there, by the way. All these things are fair game. At the end of the day, though, a lot of people, and this is one of the things that we always come back to, is a lot of times parents and students especially get very, very excited about the idea of fit, which is to say, oh, I visited this school, and the most important thing is fit. The most important thing is, oh, I know that this school has a great English program, or I really want to take a theater class with that guy. For us, all of our advice really comes down to one phrase. We believe that students should go to the best school that they can get into. Okay? Go to the best school you can get into. Now, what do I mean? Well, let's take an example. Johns Hopkins, for example, everyone knows, oh, well, that's great for doctors, right? Actually, they have a great English program. Brown University, that's where I went for undergrad. It's great for, you know, arts and political activism and so forth. Actually, it's a great engineering program. The point is, don't overestimate the idea of fit. Okay? These kids are 16 years old, they're 17 years old. They think they know what they want to do, maybe, for a living today. But guess what? That may change. You know, again, I started in real estate. It may change. Don't overestimate fit. If an English major, for example, if an English major gets into Johns Hopkins, which is a great medical school, I guess, or the University of Iowa, which has arguably the best creative writing program, guess what? Our advice is to go to Johns Hopkins. This is an internationally recognized school. It's going to suit the kids so well in the future. That's why it's so important to us. Go to the best school you can get into.
Thank you. Hey, Diane, would you like to lead to the second question?
Yeah, thanks so much. And just a quick note for our audience, we were looking at tonight's conversation as being a two-parter. Our first part one questions are going really to be answering questions that came from parents of the current seniors who are applying right now. And then we'll get to questions from parents of younger high school students. So next up, we had a question from a parent who says, I feel as if my student's guidance counselor is suggesting schools below her potential. How can I encourage her to reach higher? And a couple of things are going on there. One is that sometimes our students don't listen to their moms and dads, but what do you think about that?
I can answer this one. You know, I talk to parents every single day. I'm usually the first person they speak to, and you know, usually my job is to talk them off of a ledge because they are so overwhelmed with this process. So this is actually a question I get all the time, and I think it's, you know, it's great because the parent who asked this obviously has done a little bit of work and understands already. You know, they're already a step ahead, knowing that the schools that are being recommended are below her student's potential. And you know, it happens all the time, and it happens no matter what kind of school you go to, private, public. The truth of the matter is, guidance counselors are stretched very, very thin, you know, because whatever the reason, if it's budget cuts, if it's just the structure of the district, oftentimes they're working with an average of, you know, 300 to 400 students, and because of that, they don't have the time to, one, really get to know the student well enough to be able to guide them, you know, on such a one-on-one individualized level. And two, they don't have a lot of time to really get to know and research the programs, these schools. There's thousands of colleges out there. It's really hard to know them all. And this is, you know, no fault of the individual counselors. It's just a product of, you know, the cards they've been dealt. So, you know, I would recommend at first, the guidance counselor is a great resource for certain points in the process, but I think the mistake that a lot of families make is relying on the guidance counselor to be the end-all be-all decision maker of the process. You know, to the mother or father who asked this question, they're already sort of, you know, trying to take a little bit of ownership, get more involved in the process, and I think that is very important for every family to do, to make sure that you are invested in the process along with your student. So the ultimate, you know, the school list at the end of the day, the direction that you guys go as a family is something that is your decision with the help of, you know, the support staff at school or wherever else you go. In terms of this particular question, you know, I think a lot of students are afraid to reach higher because they're afraid of failing. And, you know, as John said, you know, every student should have REACH programs on their list. Everybody should be reaching high because you may fail, but they also may get in. And I think if the parent has an honest conversation with their student about, you know, making it a little bit more okay, making them see that it's okay if they don't get in, and making them see what could happen if they could get in, you know, that's the first step in the process. And then, of course, the next step is figuring out what schools are at that student's potential and what schools are, you know, reaches for that student. And that's a conversation, again, that you would have with your student, getting to understand really what they want out of college. You know, maybe they don't know, maybe they can't verbalize it, but maybe it's finding out what schools they dream about, what schools they would want to go to, and having that be the starting point, and then building a list from there. You know, you're going to look at scores, you're going to look at incoming class statistics to figure out what the ultimate range will be, but the first step in that process is making the student understand that they can reach a little bit higher and not to just listen to the counselor.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So our next question is taking into account the time of year. It says it's almost November. What can my son do in the next 2 months to strengthen his applications?
So I'm gonna take this one. I think this is a question that we receive all the time, especially this time of year, because students are coming to us and saying, hey, you know, what can I do to present the best possible version of my application? And there are certainly things that you can do, but let me get out of the way the two things where there's not so much that you can do. The first is GPA. Now that will be really, you know, your junior year GPA, your student's junior year GPA is key, and that's going to be really what is the benchmark for what they're judged by. And your student will submit mid-year reports and end-of-year reports, but those are just to make sure that the grades haven't, you know, dropped down dramatically. Now the second thing is extracurricular activities. You know, in general, there's not really much time now to do anything meaningful here. Admissions committees are looking for extracurricular activities that have a lot of solid participation devoted to them. But let's say, okay, you've done something around this time last year, some certain sort of activity, a volunteer activity. You can do that again to, you know, to show that it's something you're doing again during your senior year. But you have to be careful of this approach. Admissions committees are very discerning of judging and figuring out what you know, what the strengths of your extracurriculars. Now on to the things that you can do something about, the essays. Now these are the most important thing to focus on right now. I mean, I like to say that the essays are your students' chance to express something that's not in the rest of the application. So it's a chance to show, to let a personal quality shine, a major accomplishment, really anything that is going to get the admissions committee's attention and also speak volumes about your son or daughter. And so that right now, essays, and it's something, essays are not something that are the kind of writing that is inherently comes natural to a high school student who's been drilled in very much academic writing. Essays are something that are more like, you know, somebody who is drafting their memoirs, and that can be difficult for a student. That can be tricky to suddenly switch gears to that. So that's one thing we try to help with. The other things are standardized tests. There's still room to improve. Even if you're applying early, you know, Sunday's the November 1st deadline, you can still take the November SAT or ACT. If you're applying for wherever you're applying regular, you can take the December SAT or ACT to try to improve your scores. And the final two things, the first are letters of recommendation. Now, you know, you really want to make sure that you have the right to people writing these for your son or daughter, the ones that know them best and can speak to their strengths. And finally, the interview. Now, this is not something that's mandatory for all colleges. It's something that is you know, required for some, but not for others. And so we always recommend that students, if it is not a requirement, but it's a possibility, to take that chance and take that opportunity, because there's nothing quite like you know, meeting a representative from the college, whether they're an alum or a representative from the school's admissions office, and speaking to them one-on-one. There's just really a tremendous value in showcasing your personality there. So that's what I would say for that.
Great, thanks so much. So the next question we had was really about the resume section on the Common App. And we were curious to know, do you think that students need to submit a resume with their application?
So I'm gonna field this one again. You know, I would say it's not necessary, but it's also not a bad idea. There are places where you can upload attachments, and it's also a great way to get the ball rolling. If you're not writing your essays yet, you can start off writing your resume and figuring out what are your strongest activities, figuring out what are your strongest awards, or figuring out what makes you unique in your profile. And sometimes filling out a resume can be helpful there. And your resume should also be able to translate to the activity sheet on the Common App page. And that's where you fill in your activities, the grades participated, all that other great info. And your resume should translate into there. You should be able to just copy and paste the activities into there. So it's a good idea to have a resume, even just to be able to do that. The one thing you want to make sure of is that all activity descriptions are under 150 characters with spaces, because that's the limit on the Common App. So, and it's also a good way to ensure that it's really succinct and gets to the point quickly. The other thing is that a resume is great to bring to interviews. I know personally, as a Harvard interviewer myself, I'm not given information about the student when I come in. It's sort of done cold for a reason, but sometimes a resume can be a nice introduction to just get an overview of the grades and scores and activities and things like that. And it could also be a conversation starter in the interview as well. Oh, I see, this past summer you did X, Y, and Z. Like, let's talk about that. But the important thing with the resume, and I've seen students go way over the top with this, is you want to keep it to one page. You want to keep it easily digestible. You don't want to, list everything that's happened in your entire life. And in that same vein, you only want to list what's happened from 9th grade onward. I mean, admissions committees don't really care what happened in middle school, unless it was some very, very significant thing that happened in your life. And the last thing that I would say about the resume is don't be afraid to take risks on it. You want to have and just instead of just saying in personal interest that you like to dance, maybe say that you've taken up and learned the Argentinian tango. You can say something like that. That to me is more colorful and more interesting. And so you want your activity, the descriptions, to be honest, but you want them to also read in a very accessible and very sort of exciting way.
Great, thank you so much.
That led right into our next question, and you may have answered this, but if you have anything else to add, a parent had asked in the activities section of the Common App, what is the best way to word the activities, the descriptions of the activities that your student has participated in? I think there are 10. You're allowed to describe 10. So if you have anything else to add on that topic, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll take that one real quick. First of all, I just want to reiterate what Stephen said. I have met many students, and I have had many of them give me, like, no exaggeration, 5, 6, 7-page resumes. I'm an adult, and my resume is 1 page, so it is very overwhelming. So I just want to reiterate that in terms of the activities section, as you just said, you're limited to 10. You're limited to, as Stephen said, 150 characters. So this is your chance as a student. It's your student's chance, if you're the parent, to really show the school how awesome you are outside of the classroom. They've got your transcripts, they know what you're doing in the classroom, so you want to make sure that you're picking out your best activities that are going to show them what you care about, what you're passionate about, how engaged you are, the leadership roles you got, any awards that you got. This is your chance to really blow it all out. It's not a good time to get flowery with the language, though, because you have such limited space. So you have to be very actionable. You've got to be, really, really concise, very quick. It doesn't have to sound like an essay. It has to sound like a list of activities and your involvement in them. So you want to keep it tight, and you want to keep it really to the most impressive things that you have. If you took a mission trip for a week in your sophomore year, or you were really involved very shallowly with an activity for 2 months, don't put those on there. Don't waste the time. You want to put the stuff that you did and did really, really well and you were really engaged in.
Great, thank you, Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our next question is talking about finances. And so the question is it true that the best state colleges actually cost the same as Ivy League private schools, or do the highest ranked colleges cost more?
Sure, I'll field this one. Actually, we get this question a lot. Usually, though, it's not in terms of a question. We'll come up with a school list with a kid, and we'll suggest maybe 1 or 2 schools, sort of maybe a private school, maybe a small school, Wesleyan, something like that. A parent comes back and says, "Oh, I can't afford that." And we say, "What do you mean? You're applying to University of Michigan." And the parent says, "Well, but that's a public school. It's going to be much cheaper." It doesn't really work that way, okay? There are 2 things to talk about here that are very important. 2 things that most people don't know, actually. The first is that while it's true that the highest ranked colleges do cost a lot, they're also the ones that tend to give the most money. Okay, so yes, Harvard costs $65,000 a year, or even Swarthmore costs $60,000 a year. You know, most schools in the top 50 will cost about the same. That's not the point. The point is that the schools that are the best will give out the most money. Okay, most people don't realize that. Second thing that you got to keep in mind that most people don't know is that actually a public university can cost just as much as a private university. It just depends on the school. University of Michigan, Lauren Herskovich, who is our COO, by the way, who's on the call with us, attended University of Michigan. It's a great school. But did you know that generally University of Michigan last year cost $57,000 a year total if you're out of state?
Luckily, I was in state, so I saved a lot of money there.
Fair enough. Thank you for that clarification. That was very important. So Michigan is in at $57,000 a year. Yale, school a lot of people have heard of, is $60,000 a year. Okay, what's my point? My point is they all cost just about the same. This assumption, oh, I can't go to this school because it's private, I want to go public, as long as you're out of state, they roughly cost the same. And then when you add the fact that the private schools are giving more grant money, giving more financial aid, actually they can be cheaper. Okay, the idea of, oh, it's too expensive, okay, is not a good reason to apply or not apply to a school. Okay, now, by the way, some schools have some other great incentives. Okay, some schools, for example, have rules. A rule might be that if a family makes $65,000 per year or less, they go for free. I know some schools in the top 10 that have that rule. If the family salary is $65,000, kid goes for free. By the way, that's usually about 20% of the student population. That's a lot of kids. That's a lot of financial aid. Okay? So there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of myths. I do have just a couple general statistics that I want to run through just because they're interesting. Roughly 70% of students receive financial aid every year in the form of need-based grants. That's a lot. Okay, there are 39 schools that are need-blind here in the U.S. Okay, 6 are need-blind internationally. That's a whole other conversation which we won't get into. Unfortunately, though, what that means is that other than those 39, most schools are not need-blind. Okay, so as a practical matter, and it's unsavory, schools won't phrase it this way, the way that I'm about to. But what it means is that they will look at whether or not you're applying for financial aid in your application. And if you're not, there is some kind of advantage. Okay, that's just the bottom line. Of course, the trend is that more and more schools are becoming need-blind. Last little fun fact. Just generally what the annual costs are for students. Private colleges, roughly $31,000 a year. Public universities out of state, roughly $23,000 a year. So again, you see that delta is not so big. And lastly, public universities in state, about $9,000 a year.
Wow, those are great. Thank you so much. Those are, I totally agree. I think it's fascinating to just really look at what's the real cost of going to a school, and it's never what you think it might be.
That's right.
I think this is a great kind of follow-on question to that, and same thing where a lot of parents don't even do this because they assume they won't qualify. But the question is, I don't think our family qualifies for financial aid. Should I file the FAFSA?
I can definitely field this one. So I think before we answer it, I just want, for anyone who's on the call who doesn't really know how to get to that point where they decide whether or not they can qualify or not, the first thing you want to do for everybody is figure out if you qualify. This is obviously something that is part of the FAFSA application, but you don't have to wait until the FAFSA comes out to start that process. I know the College Board, their website has a tool where you can estimate the cost of the college and just figure out, if you actually do need to apply. If it turns out that you have a demonstrated need, which means that you, with your salary, cannot afford to cover the cost of a year of tuition, then you absolutely should apply for, fill out a FAFSA, apply for the aid. But if that's not the case, if that's not you, and you run all the numbers and you can afford, we would recommend not filling it out. Now, what's going to happen if you do? You're not going to get in trouble. It's not going to come down and hurt you in any way. You're just not going to get the money. The problem is, as John was just speaking about need-blind schools, if your student is applying to a school that is not need-blind, meaning they're going to consider whether or not you need money when they decide whether to admit your student or not, if you have filed for a FAFSA, that could end up working against your student, because if you actually don't need it and you apply, they might put you into the pool of those that do, which means you may not make it in. Whereas if maybe you did not apply for the FAFSA, you would have gotten in. So unless you absolutely need it, to the point where if your student got accepted and you did not get that funding, your student could not go, I don't think that you should fill it out. You know, it's also a really long form to fill out, and they ask you a lot of very personal questions. You have to give them all of your tax documentation. You know, if you don't need the money, then it's not worth your time. And, you know, as one follow-up, obviously everybody wants help paying for college. It's very expensive, and you may not qualify for the federal funding, but, you know, there are other ways to get it. You know, schools have their individual grants, their individual scholarships. There are tons of private companies and private organizations that are just looking to give away money. And if you can invest the time in seeking those things out and working with your student to apply for some of these grants or these scholarships, there is money to be had that is not through the federal government.
Great, thank you for sharing that perspective.
I think we're ready now to shift gears a little bit and answer some questions. Hopefully you guys are okay with this, from parents of younger students, freshmen, sophomore, and junior students. The first couple of questions are all about timing. First question, my son is in 10th grade, and while his school doesn't offer any college guidance until the end of junior year, some students seem to be focused on colleges already. What sorts of things should he be doing now to prepare?
I think this is an excellent question, and you know, we're definitely, we love answering these kind of questions because we also work with students in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, because this is so important, the college application process, that it's good that students are thinking about it early and thinking about how best to position themselves, because, you know, we like to see that students are planning. So the two things that your student should always care about from 9th and 10th grade onward are clearly extracurricular activities and GPA. GPA, of course, is a given. You know, you want to have the highest grades possible that you can throughout your high school career. But then again, if your grades aren't so great freshman year, but they get better sophomore year, schools will be more forgiving of an upward trend rather than, like, let's say, a downward trend. So like I said before, the most heavily scrutinized year is junior year, what classes you've taken, what grades you've taken. And with your extracurricular activities, these are the part of the application that you know, that I like to say that students sometimes worry the least about, but often to, you know, their own detriment. I think extracurricular activities are hugely important in the college admissions process, because not only do they show that you're an active participant in your high school community, in your community around your town, in the community of the world, but it also shows your future potential to be active in a campus community, and that's something that's huge. Colleges are looking for people who are not just going to come to college and take classes, but who are going to come and participate in extracurricular activities. So your participation should be high, you know, from freshman year onward, and you should have an eye on leadership positions as you get older, an eye on starting your own organizations, and really increasing your participation in a meaningful way in things that you're passionate about as you go on. And during your sophomore year, you're going to take some standardized tests. You're going to take the PSAT, NMSQT, that's National Merit Scholar Qualifying Test. This is for students who are high achievers who want to qualify for the National Merit Scholarship. But your PSAT is also a good gauge to see how well you do on your SAT. And then you can also take your SAT for the first time sophomore year in the spring of sophomore year, or your ACT as well. The other thing you want to do throughout high school, say after 10th grade and after 11th grade especially, is you want to plan for meaningful activities to do something to do over the summer. Admissions committees like to see that you're pursuing your passions and you're following your interests over the summer, and doing so in a meaningful way, and not, you know, just sitting home and playing video games or something like that. That you are being active and continuing to do the things that you like to do. So and then summer activities also, it's a good choice for you know, for your college essays. You know, there's programs you can choose from, and you can do travel, community service, even work-study programs. The idea is that you could potentially, hey, write an essay about this. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, but to paraphrase, one of my favorite quotes by Emerson, it's the journey, not the destination, that matters. So it's the journey of doing that extracurricular activity, doing that summer activity that matters, not necessarily the end goal. The other thing I would do during sophomore year is I would start, writing practice. It's best for your son or daughter to start thinking about what makes for good essay topics. Like I said before, it's not a kind of writing that just naturally comes easily, especially to high schoolers. So they want to think about questions like, what have been my biggest achievements? What have been my greatest struggles? Have I really, experienced failure? Not in the sort of way of, oh, I bombed a test, but rather knock down, drag out real life failures. Also, what qualities make me unique? What views do I have that are different from others? And then, like I said before, connecting to activities, what extracurricular activity am I most proud of and why? Those are things that they can start thinking about and start writing about, and just to get in the groove of things. Now, in your junior year, it's a little more structured. You want to take, the SAT or the ACT in December, January, whether that's your first or second time. Then you can take it again in the spring, and then finally in the summer or fall if necessary. And then the other really important thing to do during junior year is start your college research and really spend meaningful time on this. And college websites have become a great resource to find out a lot of information about the school and then the departments. And you really want to look into this and see, what your options are. Then, the last thing, one of the last things you want to do towards junior year is figure out who's going to write your letters of recommendation. You want to line up maybe 3 to 5 potential people, and then plan on asking them maybe by the end of junior year, beginning of senior year. And then, like I said, summer is important again. The junior-senior summer is one of the biggest. Always in interviews, I will always ask, what did you do last summer? How did you spend that summer? And it's oftentimes the most high achieving and the most successful kids who have really spent that summer in a meaningful way. So you want to keep that in mind. And again, the idea is, can this make for a good essay? What are my greatest stories? Does this illustrate who I am? And considering that in light of all the activities that you do, not just the summer ones. So that would be the sort of general timeline that I would sketch for any student.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So our next question is about campus visits, and the question from the parent was, should we visit campuses, and how should we choose the schools to visit? Also, when is a good age to start?
Sure. I'll take this one. By the way, I should say before I do, Stephen keeps on alluding to the interviews he does. Just to make it clear, Stephen is an interviewer, an alumni interviewer for Harvard University, the same way that I'm an alumni interviewer for both Harvard and for Brown. In fact, most of the guys who work for us are like Stephen. Stephen's a Harvard graduate, but also have some admissions experience as well. Okay, so let's talk about campus visits. The answer is a wholehearted yes. Please do visit. It's a great idea. There's no reason not to. In terms of timing, you should go, the best time to go probably, the first time anyway, is the summer going into your junior year. Sometimes we're approached by parents, they'll say, oh, does the school keep track? Or should I sign up for classes, and are they going to remember that I went, and should I meet the admissions guys and all that stuff? The answer is that no, these visits are not going to help your chances in any, in terms of these spreadsheets that these admissions guys are supposedly keeping and so forth. But just the same, it's a critical part of the process. The way I see it, it's one of the only chances for the student to be proactive. I mean, this is the part where the student picks the schools, right? Believe me, there's going to be plenty of time for the schools to pick or not pick the students. There's a great chance for the kid to be proactive for a lot of reasons. My personal experience, and I visited a bunch of schools, when I got to Brown, I just looked around, and it was it. I just knew, oh, these people are just like me. I fit in here. I should go to Brown. That realization made everyone's lives so much easier. Not just mine, because I only had to do the one early action application, but it makes the guidance guys' lives easier. I'm sure it makes my parents' lives easier. So absolutely, you should. You should absolutely visit. But before you do, here's your plan. All right. Before you visit, you should be able to do just a ton of research online. All right, university websites are actually great, and they get redone every year, and they just get better and better and smarter and smarter. There are so many resources there. It's not just PR. You can audit classes. You know, there's student profiles, there's department websites, there's lectures you can watch. It's incredible what they've done. It's so different than it was back in the day, back when I was applying. So start there. All right. From there, put together a list of maybe 20 schools. You know, sometimes we'll be talking to parents, and parents will say, "Oh, we didn't get out to California. We couldn't go. You know, it took too long, or this is a good one. It's too expensive." You know, and I'm just thinking, if you can't afford, you know, a $250 plane ticket, you know, you have no idea what's in store for your kid. You know, it's worth it. Go. Spend the $250. Trust me. Visit these schools. All right? So step 1 is do research online, right? Step 2 is create a list of 20 schools. Step 3 is go. All right? When you go, tell you what, talk to students. They'll tell you the truth. They haven't been trained in PR. You know, they'll tell you the truth, right? They'll give you honest opinions. Ask them what's good. Ask them what's bad. Ask what's changing. Ask about good departments. All right? Very important. For some people, a physical visit's not possible, and that's okay. That's okay. Most schools will allow you to organize what many are calling a virtual visit, which is, you know, Skyping with students, like I said before, sampling classes and so forth. Anyway, so the point is that the school visit is very important. It's very important for the kid. Less important for the admissions guys. You're not gonna wow them and guarantee admission, you know, 6 months later when you formally apply. But it's a very powerful tool, and we recommend that to every school that you're considering. If you have the time and if you start early, you should absolutely visit.
Great, thank you so much. So our next question is about in-house guidance departments in high schools. And we're wondering, if your school offers this, you know, how do you know whether or not they'll need additional help? And if they do need additional help, what are some of the options that you would recommend?
I'm going to take this one, sorry guys, because I love this question. I answered it this morning, so I feel very primed and ready to share my insights. So to make a long story short, chances are any student, whether or not you've got guidance counseling and a great, you know, support staff at the school, you're probably going to need some extra help. You know, as I talked about before, guidance counselors are stretched very, very thin, and they're not only working with seniors, but they're working with students, you know, in all 4 years of high school. So you think about the fact that they have to work with all of their seniors, and they've got basically 4 months to do everything for every single senior before the applications hit. And on top of that, they're also working with all these other students, you know, who need them as well. So the problem there is that your student most likely will not be able to get the one-on-one individualized support that they're going to need in order to really put out an effective, you know, and like strong application. The other problem is that, you know, because of the time constraints, because of the way that the counseling departments are set up, most schools don't start thinking about and working with students on their college admissions plans until their junior year. And yes, the junior year is by far the most important year in the grand scheme of things, but every student should be starting to think about college from the moment they get to high school, because the colleges are going to be considering every moment since the moment they get to high school. And if you wait until junior year to have your first plan or thought about college, you're going to be a little bit late. So, you know, everybody should be seeking out support outside of school, whether it's, you know, people that you know, older siblings or family members, or my personal favorite, people like us, you know, Admissionado. We are, you know, professional mentors, and obviously I'm a little bit biased because, you know, these are my professional mentors, but I believe really strongly in what we do, and what we do is born out of a demand of, you know, parents calling us, coming to us, looking for support because they aren't getting what they were hoping they could get out of school. The woman I spoke to this morning, her daughter is at a very fancy boarding school in Connecticut, and today is October, 28th? Her guidance counselor at this fancy boarding school has yet to start working with her on her college applications. So this girl has now missed any opportunity to get into early action, and her parents are nervous, naturally. So, you know, they came to us to get help, and the reason that working with a professional mentor is valuable is not just because your student will get that one-on-one support, which is going to be so important in helping them build a strong application, but also, you know, the things that our guys do, guys like Steven, are things that guidance counselors don't do and don't claim to do. They are not enough hours in the day, as much as they wish they could. For example, essay support, working with these kids on their writing. This one-on-one unlimited access on the phone to answer everything from school selection to my mom is driving me crazy, can you please help me talk to her? And then, the other thing that's really valuable about working with a mentor, at least on our team, 16-year-old, 17-year-old boys, girls, it's really hard for them to relate to a 50-year-old guidance counselor. They're not going to be comfortable, they're not going to open up, and really that's what you have to do. You have to really open up and make yourself a little vulnerable in order to really put out strong essays and to really understand who you are and what you can contribute to a campus. And that's what's so great about our guys. Stephen is young, and these students just open up to him instantly. There's other guys on our team as well. They're doing the things that the students want to do, and the students listen to them and open up to them much more than they do to their parents, which really leads to some amazing results at the end. So I think that every student should, if they can, if you can afford it, get a mentor, work with somebody, just because it's a long-term investment. And if this is going to help your student get into a better school at the end of the day, they're going to see that money come right back into their pockets when they get that first job after they graduate.
Great. Thank you so much.
Our next question, also again about younger students. If my student doesn't have access to AP classes, will he be at a disadvantage when he applies to college?
So I can take this one. The answer here for top schools is a firm and resounding no. That your student won't be at a disadvantage. And the reason is because these top schools, the admissions committees, are incredibly discerning, and they take into account things like your school environment and your available resources. Many of these admissions committees at your Ivy League schools, at your top 25 schools, if they have a student who's applying from, let's say, the some middle of nowhere high school in South Dakota, or some inner city school somewhere else that has never even, that no student from that school has ever even applied to Harvard or Yale or Princeton, these schools will actually then do their research on this school and figure out what the school offers. What do they offer AP classes? Do they offer advanced classes? Because what they're looking for then is they're looking to judge, has this student, they're not only looking for what the student has accomplished, but have they maximized their accomplishments within a limited scenario? So and top schools are actually seeking out students like this, the so-called diamonds in the rough, because they like to see students who, despite having less resources than other students, have managed to achieve and excel and have managed to gain a good education and a good perspective and work really hard, because these are the kind of people who will be the creative problem solvers of the future. These are the kind of people who will enter into the workforce and be really value-adding members of that. And so, like I said, the top schools will seek out these kids. And so the unfortunate answer, as at some of the lesser colleges, the answer is maybe, that it might hurt your son or daughter's chance if they don't have access to AP classes. That's because, if you're talking about a sort of lesser ranked large state school that's reviewing a ton of applications, they're not going to have that time to put that research in, and they might just see a transcript that is not filled with these top tier classes and think negatively of it. But I would say that happens more so with schools that as you go down the list of the top 100. But here's the thing. Even if your student doesn't have access to AP classes, he or she should still be trying to maximize grades throughout high school, and then also taking the most challenging classes. Any school is going to be impressed by a student who has a full slate of classes and is excelling in them and is managing a 4.0 GPA, even if they're not AP classes. It's a different story if their grades aren't as good, or if they're taking classes, or if they're taking home ec, shop, things that aren't necessarily as academic based, and that could work against them. But so the point is that your student should maximize their course load within their given situation. And I would say also for the standout kids out there, for the kids who really want to go above and beyond, there's always the option to enroll in additional courses. I mean, this is rare, but we really like to see students who enroll like at the community college level or local college level in some really difficult classes. So yeah, I would say that's my advice there.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And so our next question is whether early action or early decision options give students a better chance at admission.
So I'll field this one also. I'll field this one quickly. And so it's tempting to say yes, when you look at the numbers. Take Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, right? You have a 5.8% overall admission at Harvard, 18.4% early. The same as Yale, 6.7 versus 14.4. Princeton is similar. So you would say, okay, well then I have a better chance of getting in. The reality is the early action, early decision pool is stronger. It attracts these stronger students and the students who are dedicated and who really want to go to this school. The one thing you also have to remember is admissions is not a gamble. You don't apply to Harvard and then for anyone there's a 5.8% chance you'll get in. If you apply to Harvard and you're an incredible candidate, there's a much greater percentage chance that you get in. If you apply to Harvard early or regular and you are not a good candidate, there is likely a 0% chance you get in. So it's not really a gamble. The reality is, if your child is qualified, he or she will get into a school either early decision or regular decision. It shouldn't make a difference. But if your student is really committed, we really recommend that they apply early. I mean, one of the biggest benefits is that it forces the kid to be ready to have things done earlier by November 1st, and then they also get a decision by December 15th. So it works all around.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so our last question, we're going to wrap up after this one, is about really choosing the best letters of recommendation. So how do you encourage parents about which letters of recommendation to choose? And should she ask her junior year teachers? And is it okay to submit more recommendations than the school actually asks for?
Sure, great questions. Like so many things in life, this answer starts out very simple, and then what happens is there are a lot of buts along the way. But this situation, but that situation. The magic rule, the easy answer is when it's time to select letters of recommendation, you pick the guy that knows you the best. It's that simple. You pick the guy who can speak to your strengths, period. But there are other situations. there are other situations to talk about here, and we'll get to them here, and certainly won't take more than just a minute or two. You should never ask somebody to be one of your main recommenders simply because he has impressive credentials. The way that it usually works is a school will request 2 letters of recommendation and sometimes 3. Okay, those 2 should absolutely be the guy that knows you the best, the guy who can speak to your strengths, right? It's just that simple. Now, how do you know if that's the right guy? Part of the way that we know is you ask your son or daughter, would they feel comfortable asking this person for personal advice, for life advice? If yes, then that's the guy. If no, then maybe that's not the guy. Now, here's what you should not do. Okay, we already talked about you should not ask somebody solely because of impressive credentials, and we'll get back to that in just a minute or so. But you also should never write your own letter of recommendation. We see this all the time. I wish we didn't. I think students, or maybe parents especially, think, well, gosh, I can write the best recommendation ever. I know my son. Or the kid says, gosh, I can make him say exactly what I want this recommender to say. This is a horrible idea. The reason is, and we call it the 70-30 rule at Admissionado. What we mean is 70% of the letter of recommendation is the stuff that you know he's going to say. You know what your strengths are, generally. You even know what your weaknesses are. We do, typically. What you don't know is that other 30%. Maybe he's going to say something that you don't know. Maybe he's going to say something unexpected. All right, this is the real value of a recommendation. Is he's going to add something. A college application, you've written 1,000 words, right? 650 Common App plus maybe 100 more, 200 more here or there. Let somebody else have a shot. Okay, don't write your own letters of recommendation. So like we said before, there's 2 letters and then possibly a third. Okay, should you submit 2 versus 3? If you have great letters, if you can come up with 3 fabulous recommenders to write recommendations, absolutely submit the third. If you can't, don't feel any pressure to come up with a third one just because you're allowed to. Okay, before you know it, there's a lukewarm recommendation, or maybe the recommender says something you don't want. The worst thing in the world would be if a letter of recommendation actually weakens your application. Okay, you want to make sure that that doesn't happen, and sometimes it does. All right. Last point I'll make. This is a question that came in a little bit late. Was, well, what if you know somebody who's really important, right? What if there's a VIP? Let's take a simple example. What if your dad is best friends with President Obama? All right, or maybe the CEO of Goldman Sachs, right? The idea is a very powerful person. You know, the reality is that schools want people they want kids, applicants, who are going to grow up and be powerful. And in this crazy world of ours, right, if your dad is friends with President Obama, probably you're going to be successful, right? If you have friends in high places, this can be valuable. Now, remember the first rule back when things were simple. You do not want that VIP letter to replace one of the 2 that's critical, okay? But could you add that as possibly a third letter of recommendation, the Obama letter? Absolutely you can, and you should. Maybe your Uncle Olaf is a big donator, and he gives, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Should he write you a letter? You know what? He probably should. He probably should. But maybe that's not one of your top 2 recommendations. Maybe it's your third, or it's just a separate letter. It's a letter to the president. You know, it's a letter perhaps to the alumni organization, whatever. So you can use that VIP letter here and there, and you should, because life is real and power is important, especially to universities, but never at the expense of that first rule. You pick the guy that knows you the best, who can speak to your strengths. You know, letters of recommendation are a powerful tool. If you make the right moves, they can be a real benefit to your application.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you all joining us tonight to answer all of our questions. And thank you so much to all the parents who submitted their questions. And of course, thank you to Evan and Diane for also helping. And if you want to find out more information about Admissionado or University Parent, we'll be sure to post the links on this chat as well as on our site at universityparent.com. So please go there to look for them. And you can follow us on Twitter. Look for the number, or look for @ and then the number 4 college parents, or on Facebook, just facebook.com/universityparent.
And we didn't get to everybody's question, but we will make sure to post either blog posts or something along those lines to make sure that all of our parent questions get answered.
Great point. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks again. Have a great night.
Thanks, Admissionado.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.